Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
With all of us.
I think somebody may have started.
Anybody hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, good.
Is that Steve?
Yeah, it's Steve.
Hi, Steve. It's Rick DeRico. How are you?
How you doing? Pretty good, Rick. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for being a part of our discussion today.
Rick,
Good. No big deal.
Rick, I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. I believe that the thing got started by accident. Hold on just
Yep.
one
Looks
second.
like it.
And we're still waiting on Charlie and Mike.
And I'm gonna.
Muted.
Hey gang, this is Mike. Anybody home?
Unmuted.
Hey, Mike, it's John. Looks like we started the broadcast a little bit earlier, so folks will be able to hear us and see us. So we're just asking everyone to turn off the webcams and mute yourself until we get started, if that's okay.
Yes, sir. Got it.
All right. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
You bet. Thanks.
Bye.
Hey, Charlie, I'm going to have you go ahead and turn off your webcam. The broadcast got started a little bit early, so we're just turning off the webcams and muting ourselves right now before we get started.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
sure.
Hey guys, I'm in.
Thanks, Tony. We had the broadcast got started a little bit early, so I'm just going to have you mute yourself and we're going to start in 4 minutes. We have everyone here.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right, very, very good. Awesome.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Briggs. I am the Client Implementation Manager here at Transfinder, and it is my pleasure to be able to present to you all today Best Practices COVID-19, Navigating Uncharted Territory, Part 3. So this is a multi-part series. Parts 1 and 2 are located on transfinder.com. And I have a whole slew of wonderful guests and speakers here for our enjoyment. To get us started, though, what I'd like to do is pass the baton and pass the microphone to Steve Simmons, who is representing NAPT, who has been kind enough to let us talk to you all today. Steve, are you there?
Today.
There you are, Steve.
Hi, everybody. Hey, how's it going? Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Steve Simmons, and I'm president of NAPT. In the last few weeks, all of us have been forced to adapt to a situation that very few of us have ever seen coming. Many of us have had some prior experience working remotely or producing online programming, but it is safe to say that none of us have had to do it on this scale before. We suddenly had to move all staff and all programming away from familiar settings and routines, presenting a whole new set of challenges. To navigate them successfully, we must look at the upside and remind ourselves that we are all in this together. I encourage you to not be afraid or embarrassed to ask somebody for help, to ask any of the people that you will see and hear from today for help. We are living through a period of unprecedented challenges, many of which are out of our control. It's reasonable to need help and encouragement from others to manage the uncertainties of our world today. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength and wisdom to ask for help when you need it. By the same token, let's all commit to looking for ways to reach out and give people a hand. You are at your very best when you support and connect with others. You've all heard the saying, it's better to give than to receive, right? Turns out that that is really true today. Think about the last time you've helped another person. How did that make you feel? All of you have something significant to share and to contribute. You have unique insight and inspiration to give to others that no one else has. If you are ever unsure of what to do and how to do it, rest assured that you have friends in the community that is NAPT who will surely come to your aid. And they will do so willingly and with joy in their hearts, because in the last few weeks, we have learned something really, really important. We all need each other now more than ever. In closing, I just want to say how proud I am of all of you, but especially those of you who have shown willingness and eagerness to adapt, innovate, and make the best of a terrible situation. This will lay the groundwork for an even brighter future for us all. I'd also like to thank Transfinder for their help and support. They have been a great partner in this project. It is my pleasure to introduce their CEO, Tony Civitella, to offer some of his thoughts. Thanks from NAPT. Tony?
Welcome, everybody. Good. I know everyone's working from home, so always, I was talking to some people that obviously are affected so much here out there, and as they see me, I have like pictures of my family behind me. It's like, wow, Tony, everything's calm. Well, we're trying to be calm, and it's really where we talk about with everyone, and really, again, Steve, thank you for the great introduction, and we're so excited about what NAPT is doing, and really how these webinars have been the best practices, and how this is uncharted territories. And really, as the group is coming together, and we've seen so much now from all the transportation departments, and how they're really become the critical service providers in their communities. We always thought you guys were superheroes, but now it's really happening. And you're right, Steve. The industry is coming together, and I can't believe this is actually our third one now, our third NAPT webinar that in this series of these webinars we've been doing together. So I'm so excited. And I tell you, we understand, and of course, here's Siri's taking up hearing me say things, right? My Siri's iPad and just thinks I just said something. Right? Everyone's listening when we talk here. But I want to thank again, Mike Martin. Thank you for letting us do this. And I know the resources that as the community is coming together, there's tons of resources. And again, we have a great panel today with Charlie, Kurt, and of course Mike. How you can really provide this national overview of what's really happening and how the CARES Act will affect our clients. It's a big deal. So I'm going to be paying attention and really taking the time to understand this, because I know everyone that's participating, and of course they'll be able to, the ones that are not able to attend today, they'll be able to listen and watch the recording. But there's a lot of insight. So obviously there's going to be a lot of things here. You talk about communication. I just want to give you something about communication, is that on a daily basis, actually every night, I spend time and actually put a summary, an email to my staff every single night, and I talk about the successes and all the highlights of the day. I try not to focus on the negative things because there's enough of those things around us. So, and by doing that, I feel like I'm more closer than I've ever been with the company. I'm closer with the industry because we're communicating. We're constantly communicating, and this is where people are stepping up and they're shining. And I really see that people are thinking out of the box. And we always knew that people that had the school bus yellow running through their veins, they already knew they were special people. But man, it's happening even more. So I have to tell you, I couldn't be any more proud to be part of this industry at this time. So now let's get on with the webinar because we don't want to hear me talk the whole time. Again, thank you guys, and we can continue bringing more ideas. And now I'll hand it over to John.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Steve, so much for your prophetic words. Really, really important at these times to rely on each other. So thank you so much for that. All right. Let's get started here. A couple pieces of housekeeping before we get fully into the presentation. I first wanted to let you know that you're able to hear our voice and see our faces oftentimes, but we're not going to be able to do the same on your end. That doesn't mean that you can't communicate with us. So be sure to use the questions panel during my part of the presentation, or more importantly, during the panel presentation. We have a whole slew of moderators on the Transfinder side who will funnel your questions back to the panelists. Even if we're unable to get back to you during the presentation, we'll make sure someone reaches out after. Again, the questions panel and GoToWebinar, please feel free to use that at any time. If you've been a part of my first few presentations, I typically start with symbolism. So we had superheroes for part one. We had Swiss Army knife for part two. And this is going to be a little bit more simple than all of those. Rocks. You all are the rock in your community. It's not just about education anymore. It's about servicing the community as a whole, whether it's a 1-year-old, whether it's a 90-year-old. And we've seen all sorts of stories that encapsulate that mentality. So thank you for doing that. I mentioned it's not just food that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a lot of different entities. We're dealing with a lot of different deliveries. We're having people set up buses as Wi-Fi hubs, delivering school supplies, even doing parade routes so the teachers and the students can stay connected during this time of social distancing. So the only thing I'm going to ask of you today is keep grinding and keep up the amazing work. We've seen such great results so far. Let's keep that going. The agenda for today, we're going to cut right to it. We're going to get to the CARES Act discussion panel. And then finally, we're going to allow a lot of time for questions and answers related to that. Tony mentioned this, and I think Steve did a little bit as well. Your stories. The way that we're learning and we're adapting is by hearing from you. Whether you're a Transfinder client or whether you utilize another solution, it's important to gather as much information as possible to help all of the different organizations and operations out there. So if you do have a story, be sure to send that to mystory@transfinder.com. You may see yourself or have your district or operation become a part of one of these presentations. At the very least, you may also see this on the Transfinder COVID-19 best practices site. So we have a whole bunch of different information. You can see the first piece here. We have a lot of case studies on how some of the clients are utilizing our products to handle this. But again, you can extrapolate this and apply this to your district, even if you're not using Transfinder at this time. Here are some of the stories that have come through, and we've published them on the site. Again, the more insight we get from you, the more insight we can pass along to the greater public. Just a sampling of some of the stories. And then finally, we give you some useful information and links that could be of service for you. So we're constantly monitoring, constantly compiling, and constantly modifying this page to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information, and we're providing updates as we get them. So again, at transfinder.com. And be sure to check out transfinder.com, COVID-19 best practices page. That's my piece for this week. Short and sweet. So let's get to the meat and potatoes, if you will. I'm going to pass the microphone on to Rick DeRico, who's the Director of Public Relations at Transfinder, and he is going to be introducing the rest of the panel. They'll be using their microphones and their webcams to interact from this point forward. Rick, take it away.
Thanks so much, John. That was great information, and we'll continue to build that best practices page, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of content we're going to be adding after today's webinar. I want to welcome everybody again to this third best practices webinar with NAPT. My name is Rick DeRico. I'm the Director of Public Relations at Transfinder. There's just so much information that's coming out that we're so pleased to be able to have this kind of webinar where we can get the latest information from people who are truly in the know. So much is changing so quickly. Just yesterday, my emails, I got news about, just in New York alone, which is the epicenter, as you know, of the COVID-19 outbreak. We heard that that New York State has canceled the Regents exam for June, and that school budget votes have been pushed back at least until June. That's just a couple items that crossed my path. We're hearing also about the great things that school districts are doing to reach their communities in new ways. And as John mentioned, we're trying to gather as many of those stories as possible from across the country and add those onto both Facebook, all social media platforms, as well as that best practices page, because we are learning from each other. And you may see an idea that you read somewhere else, and someone can implement that and help better serve their community. So we can't highlight enough that email address, mystory@transfinder.com. And it doesn't matter if you're a client or not, we want to get as many of these stories as we can out there. If you have a question during today's panel discussion, please submit it in the area that's provided, and either I or my able assistant Julie or somebody else will bring it to the attention, and we'll try to address as many of these questions as we can. So without further ado, let's get to the panel. I want to introduce, first of all, and as I say your name, why don't you guys pop on screen? That'll be very dramatic. We could do it as I time it. No pressure. Mike Martin, he's the Executive Director of the National Association for Pupil Transportation. We thank you so much, Mike. Perfect timing, Mike. That was awesome for providing this platform. Charlie Hood, he is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation. And finally, we have Mackison. Oh man, I knew I was going to mess up. Kurt. It's Kurt Mackison. He's the Executive Director of the National School Transportation Association. Kurt, did I get it right finally?
You did, Rick.
Mackison. Yeah. As much as I practice these things, I want people to know that I'm human. Otherwise, people get intimidated. So I do that on purpose. I throw these little flaws in there on purpose. No, but seriously, I want to just thank you. This truly is, for all those who are joining us today, it really is an all-star panel. So first of all, I just want to thank the panel, and I want to just ask you to kind of give me a sense of just to kind of humanize this a little bit. I'll start with Mike. We'll just go down, Mike, Charlie, and Kurt. If you guys could tell me a little bit just how your lives, I mean, I'm in your living rooms or your homes right now. How have your lives changed since the outbreak of coronavirus? And, how can you give us a sense of, you've probably had to change your day-to-day procedures. Mike?
Yeah. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And as you heard Rick mention earlier, New York City is kind of the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic right now. And fortunately, I am in Albany, which is about 170 miles from New York City, where the worst of it is happening right now. But in our county, we have about 500 confirmed cases right now. We've had about 6 fatalities, I think, as of this morning, at least in Albany County. And Albany County, just one of 5 counties in what we call the Capital District. And it's about 300,000 population in Albany County itself. And the total population of the Capital District is about 1.2 million. So the grand total around this area, there's over 1,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19. Personally, it's impacted me in a couple of different ways. Probably first and foremost is that we had a relative pass last week from COVID-19. Uncle Nick, unfortunately, was 80 years old, was in a nursing home, caught the virus, and died within 72 hours. So that was pretty sad. It made it very, 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 very real for us when you not only know someone, you lose someone as well. In addition to that, we have another soon-to-be family member, my daughter's boyfriend, soon-to-be fiance. His father has been diagnosed. He's a corrections officer in an upstate facility. Both he and his work partner have been diagnosed, and they are currently being monitored. So that's another scary situation. So if you're someone who sends thoughts, prayers, and positive energy, please send some their way. On the upside, though, I will tell you this: I do know personally 3 people who are friends of mine who live here in the Capital District who have had COVID-19 and survived it. They said it was among the worst sicknesses or illnesses they've ever had, and one of those persons is a stage 4 esophageal cancer survivor. So for him to say that, it had to be a pretty rough go. But he had a 103 temperature for 5 straight days, all the classic symptoms that you talk about. Was admitted to the hospital and fought his way out of it. And frankly, he's doing great. I talked to him on Saturday. He happens to be also an NAPT CPA. And he's just a tough dude, a really, really genuinely good person. Really glad he made it out. By the same token, one of my other best friends, who was a chiropractor, had the virus and survived, as did one of his employees. Both of them said it was about as close to death as they'd ever been, close as they ever want to get until that day comes. But the good news is that they're survivors. So I want all of you to know that, at least from the inside, so to speak, at the epicenter, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's a devastating situation, but it's not something that's a death sentence necessarily. So, how has it changed my life on a day-to-day basis? I'm like all the rest of you. I'm at my house. I'm trapped inside. This is my 5th full week of confinement. I've been outside, I think, a grand total of 8 times in 5 weeks, just to get some fresh air and maybe walk up and down the driveway a little bit. So it's changed. It's changed pretty much everything we do. As a staff, we've had to work remotely and figure out how to do that, and then serve our members remotely as well. I hope we're doing that to a reasonable degree. We hope to continue to do it better, but it's not something any of us were planning for right away, for sure. So that's what comes to mind to me, Rick. And as we go through, I'd be glad to offer additional thoughts or observations if anyone has questions.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mike. Charlie? How about you? I think you're on mute. We'll come back to you. Kurt?
Yeah, thanks, Rick, and appreciate, being on the webinar with both Mike and Charlie. We forged a pretty great relationship over the past year, and, looking forward to getting through this and continuing all our good work on other issues other than COVID-19. But, as Mike said, running an association remotely and servicing the members has been a challenge. And, dealing with your staff remotely has been a challenge as well. I think the biggest thing, and it's not really an adjustment for me, but it's to maintain your routine is the biggest thing, and do all those things that you were doing in terms of getting up, making the bed, simple things like that, and staying in your routine, because I think that's what gets you through these periods of time. I think the one thing that's changed for all of us who are in the association world is we probably don't watch the news or listen to the news quite as much as we used to. We still have to get that information, and we have to extend that to our membership, but just the sheer amount of bad news, like anything else, you don't want to have to listen to that constantly. So I think I do a little less listening to the news, and I also think that to the greatest extent possible on on a personal side, because this is my busy season as a baseball umpire too. Having that not in my life, you just find other things. And I think that the typical thing you do personally is a lot of binge watching of, these shows, or maybe going back and watching some reruns of fun things. But I'm a classic movie buff, so I've taken that time to kind of review some of the classic, movies that, things like Casablanca, 12 Angry Men, On the Waterfront, those type of movies. I find fill my time, and then also a fair bit of recreational reading too, because as an association exec, you don't have a lot of expendable time for reading other than what you're reading in regulations, bills, laws, magazines. And so, I picked up a couple good books here and there too, which has been refreshing. So that's how I've adapted to it.
That's good. Well, so if my routine was not to make my bed, I should continue to not make my bed. Right?
if that works for you, but just remember, when you get back at night and you have a hard day, you're getting into that unmade bed.
No, I can't get away without having a made bed. I can tell you that. And Charlie, anything you want to add? And by the way, hey Kurt, you may want to check out High Noon again. That's worth rewatching. Gary Cooper.
Yep.
Gary. Charlie Hood, anything you want to add?
Yeah, is my audio working this time?
You're on.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. I somewhat pride myself on being a technology geek, so that was slightly embarrassing. But at any rate, I'm based out of my home office in Tallahassee. So from my personal perspective, the work part hasn't changed that much, with the exception of I'm really getting wanderlust. I enjoy the work travel. I enjoy the occasional personal travel, and obviously all that's come to a grinding halt. But in the scheme of things, that's a first world problem. I'm not upset. I have been having to, my wife and I have both been having to adjust. She's been busily she's a fashion design major by background, and does some amateur seamstressing. So she's been busily making cloth masks. I've been disassembling true HEPA air purifier filter assemblies to get the medium out of them so that she can put them in the masks. Because we are trying to stick to the CDC recommendations from Friday, that in the rare occasions when we do go out, less than once a week lately, only when we really need to, we're wearing our masks. And the particular challenge right now is that my mother lives in an independent living facility. She's 100 years old, still lives in her own apartment, still does her own laundry, and lives fairly independently, but she does live in a group home where they've had to adjust massively, and they're bringing them their meals to their rooms. And as a visitor, I always lie and tell them I'm a caregiver, which I am, but it's tough. And they may be shut down any day now. We won't have contact with her to do things like remind her to take her medicine and so on. So that's probably the biggest daily personal challenge that we're facing as a family, is trying to keep taking care of my mom. She's healthy as can be. So we want to keep it that way, and we celebrated her 100th birthday earlier this year.
Wow, that's awesome.
We took her to Hilton Head, South Carolina, before all this started. But at any rate, that's about it from me. Anything I can do to help, obviously, that's why we're here.
I appreciate it, and I wanted to share that because I felt like it's important for our attendees here to see that we're all in this boat together. We all kind of know that, but I think that it's good for them to hear that. Okay, let's just jump right into this CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It's a $2.2 trillion measure designed to support individuals and businesses affected by the pandemic. It's the largest relief bill in our country's history. I want to start off with Kurt with a couple questions and work down my list, and then we already are starting to get some questions here as well. Kurt, one of the things that the biggest questions that you're hearing, and I like to hear other questions if I don't bring it up, but is how do contractors get paid? Let's just get right to the chase here. And then what are you telling your members?
Well, it was, funny that we first talked about coronavirus. I remember this prominently at ASBC in early February, and with Steve and Charlie, and we had talked about this, and it was at that point it was just curiosity, I would say, at that time. But as it filtered through, February, we started saying, hey, how is this going to affect us? And first of all was the idea of keeping children out of harm's way. because that's what we do. And then it became quite evident that there probably were going to be school closures. And so if your transportation contractors are paid on roughly a 180-day schedule, what does that mean, moving forward? And as we researched it, more and more, we know that all or most educational funding emanates from state and local entities. And so initially we went to 50 state governors and we said, hey, we have this health crisis on our hands. How can we maintain the continuity of the school transportation, system? I will tell you that, a lot of districts have stepped up. A lot of contractors have done a lot to engage, with their customer school districts. And everybody, on that end sees the importance of, maintaining the integrity of the student transportation system. There are districts around there who aren't engaging with their contractors and paying. And so our thought on that was to go to, Washington, D.C. There had already been, 2 iterations of, stimulus that had been done. In the third one, we lobbied successfully to get Section 18006 in there that said, and basically I'll quote it because I don't want to misquote it, a local educational agency, state, institution of higher education, or other entity that receives fund under Education Stabilization Fund shall, to the greatest extent practicable, continue to pay its employees and contractors during the period of any disruptions or closures related to coronavirus. And as you see, that was written broadly to address both, private contractors as well as public school bus drivers there, because we feel, a school bus driver is a school bus driver, irrespective of whether they're public or private. And we want to protect the integrity of the system. We transport 26 million children per day on almost 500,000 school buses throughout the country. And we can't overstate, those numbers. And so we wanted to maintain that system. That language in there did spawn some activity. I will tell you that there are some states who have addressed this also through executive orders, through notifications, through their state education or transportation departments. And also, there's been legislation out there that in a couple of states. I know New Jersey's actually pursuing a bill this week to maintain those payments. And so with respect, to the CARES Act, I know that there's guidance coming from Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos on how these funds are going to be distributed. And I know this was addressed to the extent practical was addressed on the last webinar, and I thought the comments from AASA were fair, with respect to that. I think the intent of the language overall was not that, well, if you don't want to pay your student transportation, provider, that you get to ignore it. I think to the greatest extent practicable does mean something, that you have to address it somehow. So I think we're in a situation where, folks are interpreting it back and forth, and I will say overall, that there are many, I don't want to paint anything with a broad brush. There are many, many districts that have stepped up and been able to engage with their contractors. And we've always prided ourselves on being able to, work with, school districts effectively. I think there are some districts, and maybe their hands are tied from a state standpoint of not getting enough guidance, that they're having difficulty, dealing with the continuing payments. And, we'll address those as we go along. I think at the end of the day, as I say to everybody, we're trying to get to as close to 100% as possible, both public and private, that they're going to, fund their drivers. And I think it's important that we, continue to have those dialogue. And as we see, we're going to have probably coronavirus 4 coming out. And, hopefully address some of the issues there. There are other pieces in that, Rick, but I don't want to go on too long with respect to unemployment compensation, as well as the paycheck protection program that, we can talk about as well.
Let's talk real quickly, because I do have that. I want to get to the unemployment, and then we'll move over to Charlie about this $600 bump in unemployment insurance benefits. And you've gotten some questions about that and how to, what impact that could have on schools.
Yeah, I mean, it's an area where when the CARES Act was being debated on Capitol Hill, the talking point said, we are doing this stimulus to help maintain the employer-employee relationship. And then, so you're at cross purposes now when you give this extra $600, which is kind of over and above the regular compensation, to folks who are filing for unemployment, because some of the feedback that we've gotten is, hey, it's actually better for me to go on unemployment, financially better for me to go on unemployment than it is for you to maintain my job. And so, you have folks trying to do the right thing and maintain that employer-employee relationship, but then you throw this other situation in, and people are looking at it, and justifiably so from a dollars and cents standpoint. But it did create, quite a flurry of activity. Even before the bill was signed, we were getting questions about the $600 extension. There are only a couple thoughts I can leave you with. One is that the $600 from our understanding is going to last for 4 months. And the other thing is, at a certain point in time, folks are going to go back to work. And I think the biggest thing I can emphasize for everybody on all sides of this issue is just to take a long range approach to things. And that's, if you're an employee, if you have a job, I think you want to maintain that job, long range. And if you're a business owner or you're a school district with a transportation system, you want to maintain your drivers. So whenever school returns, they're ready to engage and transport those 26 million children to school each and every day. And that's the best, advice we can give. But it is kind of ironic that, you have a bill that's saying one thing, and then on the other hand does this, which made it at cross purposes with itself. But that's part of the adaptability that Steve Simmons talked about, that we just have to be adaptable
and
to conditions.
I don't think that's necessarily a first for Washington, necessarily.
No.
Charlie, you're hearing a lot from your members regarding regulatory questions, and can you give us a sense of what kind of questions you are getting, and how you're addressing those concerns?
Well, the primary category of questions that we've received, Rick, pertains really to driver qualifications at this point, and the things that the various qualifications that may be expiring or may have expired during this period of time. We put some guidance in our information report. The State Directors Association put some guidance in our information report that's on our website. And in that guidance, we basically are referencing the emergency rule that was published, or guidance, I should say, that was published by Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, in which they told school districts and contractors and charter schools, they told them that if your driver was driver's CDL, for instance, their commercial driver license expired on or after March 1st of 2020, that federally has been extended or waived, you might say, until June 30th of 2020. So they could continue to drive when and if they are able to legally under that federal guidance. That they did the same thing with medical examiner certificates that expired effective March 1st, 2020 or later. So and commercial learner's permits. So they provided quite a bit of regulatory relief from the federal level, and what we've been advising state directors, at least, which is one of our primary membership categories, we've been in state association leaders, we've been advising them that when in doubt, the federal government only writes the regulations under which the state driver licensing agency, the DMVs, and so on, have to operate. So it's actually the SDLA, the state driver licensing agency, that implements all this stuff. So you really, really need to, if you didn't have a close relationship with them before, weren't communicating and collaborating with them before. You need to be doing that now, and just ask the question. First question I got about it was from North Carolina, and they said, hey, wait a minute, our state says that our state has much more stringent rules for these things than what the federal guidance is now allowing. What do I do? And that's what I told the state director there, Kevin Harrison. It's just contact your DMV again and tell them what this new federal stuff says. And I really think that states are probably bending over backwards and doing their best for the most part to conform and comport with the allowances and the abeyances of enforcement and so on that are taking place federally. I hope they are, but the main point here is communicate, communicate, communicate. And I probably shouldn't say this part, but I will. Once you've done your due diligence by talking to your local school district or contractors, attorney, your risk manager, if you have covered yourself in terms of getting expert advice from within your own organization and documented all that, then at some point, this is a unique situation. It's unprecedented in my lifetime for sure. So at some point, this is one of those ask forgiveness, not permission situations. And I hate to say that because I don't want somebody to go out there and do something imprudent or unsafe, but we really are all trying to adapt to this.
Well, it seems like my takeaway, a couple of things is one is, there's a little bit of a loosening of the deadlines. Go to the people that know, build those relationships if you don't have them already with your state agencies. And really the key word I think also you just said was the idea of documenting everything. So who did you talk to? When did you talk? I would assume you want to keep a nice, record of these conversations. So it's not just, oh, I called somebody there, but I talked to so-and-so on this date, here's what they said, or save all your emails, that kind of stuff, Charlie?
Absolutely, and that's particularly important with regard to the drug and alcohol testing regulations, which have not been waived or held in abeyance. So you obviously can't, although a driver can be called in for drug testing even when they're not actively on duty, should they be? And if you don't, explain why. Just keep records of the driver was off duty from X date to X date and we couldn't do it. So alcohol is a little different situation because you really can only test for alcohol impairment, relative within the time period of, alcohol is a legal drug for the most part. So it's a little different situation, but without getting into the technicalities of all that, the drug and alcohol regulations are the ones where you probably need to be the most careful as an employer if you have safety sensitive employees, CDL employees who are covered by that, where you have to be the most careful to ensure that you document what's going on.
Great. All right, Mike, we are starting to get some good questions coming in here, but I want to ask Mike a couple quick things. You're hearing from members who about small business loans, emergency loans. Many of your members are small businesses. What are you telling them?
Yeah, again, kind of the questions from my standpoint have been literally kind of across the board. There's been operations questions. There's been policy questions, as Charlie alluded, but we have a variety of private sector service providers and/or state associations who are also members of NAPT, and they've asked a lot about the availability of some of those emergency small business loans. The one component of it that was alluded to earlier, I think Kurt mentioned it, and you may have too, Rick, was that payroll protection program. We've been asked questions about the economic injury disaster loans, which are available for people as well. By the same token, the employee retention payroll tax credit, and we've also been asked about the delay in employer payroll taxes too. So, to the extent practicable, we've been trying to help the affiliate members of NAPT, what we call our business partners, to try to help when they have questions. By the same token, oftentimes it is literally their state level decision makers who are actively involved in those ultimate decisions. And as a consequence, what we typically advise them is talk to your attorneys, your CPA, and your other financial advisors. They're the people who are going to give you the best guidance. I will give you just as for example, there's a small business that I talked to just the other day who banks with a bank who is not doing any of those loans. They've just decided they're not going to do them, and that's their prerogative. So they're looking for questions right now. It's difficult for them to go out and establish a new account. No one really wants new accounts right now in the banking industry. So there's a host of those kinds of questions that have been coming in. for us. And the answers, as I think Kurt alluded before, and Charlie actually referenced with regards to some of the regulatory issues too, are not really clear yet. You got to remember, this is $2.2 trillion. It hasn't really hit the market yet. I mean, we're not going to really see the impact of this. The tail is going to be, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks down the road. And the goal was to make it happen quickly. But there's a massive infrastructure underneath all of that still has to be sort of fleshed out a little bit. So we've had a bunch of those questions. One of the things I want to point out to people too, that from an operational standpoint, that also affects you as a business, whether it's public and or private sector service, is insurance relief for buses that are not being utilized right now. That's something that we're actually doing another webinar tomorrow about that with a gentleman who is a risk management expert and has a specialization in that area. So if you're interested in that at all, there's another opportunity for you to dial into a webinar tomorrow too, and talk about that. But that's something that we're trying to do is, as both Kurt and Charlie alluded as well, is kind of think, okay, what are the actual operational impacts of this that people are going to be asking questions about? What are the policy implications? And the challenge that we face right now is the same challenge we faced, frankly, for the 25 years that I've been doing this. And that is that at the federal level, we don't have one-stop shopping, right? The Federal Transit Administration, the Federal Railroad Administration, the Federal Aviation Administration, they've got kind of one-stop shopping. A lot of times when we need an answer to a question, we have to go to 4 different places. We have to touch all the bases. And like to use Kurt's baseball analogy, if you miss a base, sometimes you get thrown out. You can run back to it, but if you don't get there fast enough, they can tag you out. So part of the challenge that we face when we have to touch all the different bases to get an answer is, sometimes you skim over a base quickly. So right now, we're waiting for the U.S. Education Department to give us guidance that was supposed to be out, frankly, last Thursday. And here we are the following Tuesday, and it's still not on the streets yet, about exactly how to deal with Section 18006. Hopefully it'll be out soon, and hopefully it'll be clear for people, but don't hold your breath.
Thank you so much, Mike. Okay, now I'm going to go right to the questions, and I have a bunch more on my list as well, but these are things that are bubbling up from our attendees, and I want to get right to them. Denise asked, there's a couple. Denise and Lori both asked a question regarding payment of drivers. So Denise asked, if we are electing to pay our drivers, can they still claim unemployment? And a somewhat related question is there anything in the CARE Act that will make accommodations for part-time school bus drivers who may be just under the current threshold of hours to qualify for unemployment? So, and then this Lori writes, substitute drivers are vital and may not qualify depending on hours. So who wants to take that? Is that Kurt?
Well, so I think to answer the first question, you really can't double dip. So but I have to put a qualifier in there that my understanding of it, and this goes back to Mike's point that we're doing a lot of this, we're building this airplane in the air, especially with this, but that there could be an opportunity for partial unemployment out there. So if you maintain drivers on a payroll for a small period of time, like 1 hour a week, and that's just say to maintain their benefits, there may be an opportunity. But I caution that the unemployment insurance systems are operated almost like educational funding by the 50 states individually. So the best sources there and are going to be the local unemployment agencies. What the CARES Act did was some overarching, like that $600 stipend, did things like that. But largely you see then the rest of it gets emanates from Washington, D.C. and then flows down to the states. But there may be that opportunity, like I said, to maintain people on payroll and for a partial unemployment. And that should all be outlined in the application for UI. So we're never telling anyone to kind of ignore what the rules are. It is going to be their responsibility to deny a claim. So, if you think based on your engagement with the local unemployment agency, you can file, be truthful, and the worst you can do is get a denial.
Okay, great. I think this is a question for all three of you. It's from Rich Gallagher. How do we get around district lawyers who look at the exact words in contracts and in the bill? You know, how do you?
You could just ended it at at the lawyer part, Rick.
Yeah.
Notice that the only lawyer on the panel is laughing.
Oh man.
We talk about shoot first, ask permission later kind of thing, a little bit.
No, I mean, really, you have to, again, this is, and I don't know the answer to this question. I wish I did, right? I mean, whenever you do policy and whenever you negotiate something, right, the use of the word shall is mandate language, right? That's something you have to do. You must do it. When they use the word may, that's something that's much more lenient, or means it's generally permissible. And in this case, in section 18006, they use the word shall, right? But they qualified it with the language that says to the extent practicable, right? And I don't know where that came from. I wasn't in the room, when those negotiations were going on and how that went down. But I'll tell you this, from the people that I've talked to so far, I haven't found anyone who could tell me where that came from, right? But it was put there for a reason. And the reason is whoever had that inserted did not want to, and I'll use this word with quotes, or with air quotes, handcuff the education policymakers, right? So it had a purpose. So I think, as Kurt alluded, the goal of that section was to ensure that not just school transportation contract service providers, but all service providers through school systems, right? It was contracts should be paid or shall be paid to the extent practicable. Well, if you've got, whatever, 6 people who say, hey, look, here's what I need to do, but you don't have the resources to do that, or you have to make some sort of a decision. I think they wanted to make sure that whoever the policymakers were, whether that's the school superintendent or the school board or who knows, maybe the business official. I'm not sure where it came from. I haven't been able to find anyone who could tell me how that second modification of the mandate language ended up in that clause. But how do you get around it? I don't know. How do you ever get around things like that? Frankly, the conversation has to be about the necessity of the service. And I will have to say that, to our detriment as an industry, frankly, if you give someone a choice, oftentimes and you characterize it as you either feed them or you move them, they're probably going to feed them. They probably are. So I don't know exactly how you get around it per se. I think one of the things you have to continue to do is what we've all been doing, and that is emphasize the essential nature of transportation. We've been saying for years, as an industry and as a community of people, that transportation is not an ancillary service; it is integral to education. And in the typical setting, that's a really effective argument. When you're talking about distance learning and are educating people from home and not in a school setting, that argument has a tendency to balance out with people. If we were still in school, I think it would be really easy to win that argument, or at least make a stronger case. But right now, I'm not sure, Rich, how to answer your question. I wish I knew.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Okay.
Yeah, I agree with 100% with what Mike is saying. I would also say that when you look at that language, it does, as I mentioned in my remarks, intrinsically cause this conflict. It is a condition of funding, however, and that shall. So in our view, it can't be a situation where it's like, we've seen this, we're going to deny payment. That does not seem to pass to the extent practicable aspect. Now, if there are extenuating circumstances, and maybe this answers part of Mike's questions within a district, I don't think they wanted to handcuff districts who were really in dire straits, from having to do this. So the biggest thing is the communication going back and forth between the parties, and this is just one tool in the toolbox. I've seen, unfortunately, some kind of advertisements by attorneys looking to drive a wedge. And if your contractor is giving you a bill for this, you deny it right away. And to me, that works against everything that we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to keep people employed. We're trying to maintain the integrity of the system. We're not trying to create adversarial relationships. And so I think that one of the questions that if you're faced with this is, to probe the lawyers more on why they feel that way, and not just accept the answer and say, okay, why do you feel that way? And then to Mike's point, explain the situation further of what we're trying to, to accomplish here. I think you can take that approach of denying, payments to both employees and contractors, because that's what the language of the CARES Act says. But I do think that is likely a short-sighted approach, and that we need to be looking also short game and long game here, and what is in the best interest long-term of the Pupil transportation system. And I think when you get to that part, people have to take a global look at it.
And Rick, if I may, one thing I think that's also become really clear, and I'm fortunate, I guess my kids are out of school now in general, but talk to anybody whose kids are home right now and ask if they want them to go back to school.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
yeah,
that's looming. I don't know when it's going to happen, but hopefully it won't. I think for some people it can't happen soon enough. But
yeah.
I think for the most part, everyone is looking forward to having schools reopen. And when school reopens, the transportation infrastructure is going to be the way that 26 million kids are going to get there, at least a significant percentage of those 26 million. I mean, obviously this is going to have some sort of an impact on the way education services are delivered in the future. It's going to have an impact on instructional methodology. It's going to therefore have an impact on infrastructure. But I don't think there's any way that we're going to start school again without yellow school buses and school bus drivers to drive them.
very good. Charlie, getting a little bit off of the CARES Act for a moment, just a couple of questions when we had our pre-call recently that you crossed both Mike and Charlie, we both mentioned the kind of questions you're also getting, Charlie, how to keep the buses clean, what the appropriate methodology is there. Tell us what other, what do you say in those kind of situations, and how can we help make sure we put that on our best practices page, of course, so people can learn from it?
Yeah, before the CARES Act or before the last 2-3 weeks, that was absolutely the most common question we were getting initially was, how do I clean and disinfect my buses and make them safe for the kids and for the employees, the people who are driving them. We have put some resources into our information report that we put together. I know all 3 OEMs, original equipment manufacturers of school buses, the 3 major ones at least, Thomas International and Thomas International and Bluebird Corporation, have all written guidance documents on that take into account things like, what kinds of cleaners can be used under the EPA list, which of those cleaners are safe for use on bus seats that won't degrade them, et cetera, all kinds of things that I never thought of before. Some of that information will be on our website. Some of it already is, but I would advise anybody that wants to know the answers to those questions to contact their bus dealers because they should all have access to that. Additionally, a lot of the transit agencies, King County Metro Transit Agency in Seattle, Washington, for instance, have some really good written procedures with graphics and so on to guide people on how to clean and disinfect their buses. Those being the 2 stages and steps involved in any kind of a disinfecting operation. First cleaning with cleaning products, and then disinfecting with things that actually kill the virus, bleach, hydrogen peroxide, alcohol, those things you've all heard.
So you have those listed on your site. We can link to your site and you'll be able to find that information.
Yes, and I know the other associations, manufacturers, a lot of people like your, companies like Transfinder, as you already pointed out, have great stuff on their websites. If you want ours, I can put something. I can put the web address in the questions box, or however you want to do that, or maybe you're going to provide a bibliography. But
yeah, we'll link it on our best practices. Mike, you also had talked a little bit yesterday about people just wanting to know how to maintain safe distance when they're distributing food. That's not something they've had to do before. What kind? So,
Yeah.
How do you address that?
Yeah, we've.
Go ahead, Mike.
Someone else can jump. We've had that question several times, frankly. As you know, there are still a percentage of buses. I'm not even sure the exact number at this point, but it's becoming something that's pretty much commonplace, at least in the current environment, where school transportation service providers are delivering meals to hungry kids and their families in some cases. And from an operational standpoint, we've had people call up and go, okay, if I'm supposed to maintain some sort of personal space, whether it's originally started at 3 feet, then it was 6 feet, and now we're not sure. I guess it's still 6 feet, even if you have a mask on or not. The rules kind of changed a little bit as things evolve and we gain more knowledge. But the practical implication is still, okay, how do I do this? Some people were using Type A school buses and were using the lift to actually, put the meals on the lift, lower them down, let people take them there and bring the lift back up. Other people are driving to a site ahead of time, creating a perimeter with either tables and or tape and bringing the meals out there and leaving them there. Then you had a problem, I guess, in a couple of situations where people grabbed everything on the table as opposed to just one or two things. So those challenges are ongoing. It seems to me, from what I've been hearing and talking to people about over the last 2 or 3 weeks, is that the best way to do it, frankly, is to ensure, number one, that you have staff on site, that they maintain distancing, and that you have one in the bus and one outside the bus. And the person outside the bus should maintain distance between anyone who's coming up to get a meal and to receive a meal, whether they're getting it off the lift, whether they're getting it off a table, regardless of what your distribution methodology is. But it would seem to me that having 2 people on site, as long as they maintain distancing, is probably I'll call it a best practice for right now, at least. But yeah, that's been a challenge for a lot of people. I've heard of situations where they've used, for example, like a food tray, and they've attached ropes to it and lowered it down out of the back of the bus. So when people come up and get that, when they didn't have a lift, they used a Type C or a Type D. I mean, there's all sorts of amazing ways that people use their ingenuity and creativity to do things like that. But the most common way seems to be to have 2 people, one in the bus, one outside the bus, and then to use some sort of distancing parameter to be able to place the food in a public availability situation.
Very good. That's awesome. We're seeing a lot of creativity. I'm going to ask you guys to do this very briefly, and then I've asked Tony if he would give us a couple words at the end, and then I'll close us out. Quick takeaway that you want people who have been with us today, that you want to have one quick takeaway. I'll go with Kurt, Charlie, and Mike, and then I'm going to ask Tony to say a few words. Kurt, what's one takeaway you want folks to have from this webinar?
One takeaway. So if it's a couple thoughts, one would be adaptable, as we talked about at the beginning, but also be nimble. I think that as an association exec, the one thing that we're doing is we're trying to release the information as quickly as possible. And we're taking an 880-page bill and releasing pieces of information. Usually we would take a week or 2 weeks to review it and be totally thorough in getting that information out. That requires us now to be nimble and say, okay, we've got to pull out the most important pieces first, articulate that to our membership, and then as we go along, continue to release that information as we find it available. It's also required us to use every tool in the toolbox. So that's webinars, that's podcasts, that's also your email chains, text messages, whatever we have out there to do remotely. We're getting a trial by fire in being able to to do that. And then it also requires us to continue to do what we do. And one thing that is sometimes put on the back burner is your actual association work, those other issues that you're working on, because we're spending so much time on COVID-19 that today we had NTSB released their Rochester, Indiana, investigation findings, and that's something that we also have to keep our eye on. So it's, challenging times, but I've seen the industry come together and be unified. If that's the silver lining that we see, is that I've never seen more unification. And then we'll get through this, and just know that, together we'll get through this. But, it's been challenging times, but I from what I've seen, with all three of our organizations, really stepped up to the plate and have been providing so much information to folks out there.
Excellent. That's a lot of good takeaways there. Thank you so much, Kurt. Charlie.
I'd say just do your best to keep yourself healthy, both personally and mentally, because you all dedicate your lives to parents and students all over the country, and the best way to do that is for you to be in a position to continue to do it. So take care of yourself.
That's actually a good point. Good point. Mike?
Honestly, I was going to say the exact same thing. To me, having a positive mental outlook, being safe, and being certain when you're doing things. When I learned how to drive a car, the rule my father gave me was, if you're not sure, don't. I think that's equally applicable here. One of the other things my father always used to tell me, he was, he fought in the Pacific Theater in World War II, and he used to come back and we'd get into a difficult situation. Occasionally he'd say, hey, look, at the goal of being in a foxhole is to keep your head down. People shouldn't stand up when they're in a foxhole. I think in this situation, I would modify that to say that, we're in a foxhole right now, but stand up when you can, right? We need each other, as Steve alluded, probably now more than ever. So there's no such thing as an irrelevant question or an unimportant question. If you're unsure right now, ask. That's what Charlie, that's what Kurt, that's what I are here for. I'm here for. That's what our associations exist for. Reach out to us. We will do our best to help you whenever we can.
Excellent. Those are outstanding takeaways. Tony Civitello, are you around? I'd like to have you say a few words before we close out.
I'm around. Hey, here you are. Well, learned so much from all you guys. Really, I got to give you a takeaway here as a small business here in the United States. I got to say that because I was born in Italy. I have a lot of relatives that are facing major problems, of course, in Italy. I was from the southern part. That was really why my family moved here when I was a little kid, because the southern part of Italy is not the north. The north is much more economic growth there. And so we were the poor and we left. My family was able to come here. I just want to tell you from small business here in the United States and how we are fortunate. I tell people that, we have an office here in Schenectady, New York. We have one in Austin. We have one in Shanghai, China. By the way, we're well aware that Corona is about to come in the middle of January, and we knew that was coming, and I feel like no one's taking it serious. And of course, now we're launching an India office. But I just want to give everyone just a really sense of what's going on in this country, that really, small business especially, the government's got our back. And it's something that we are all really, I can't explain that, how we are coming together, how we are unifying. And this is, listen, Kurt, you said the long game and the short game. It really is. You got to think about not just, listen, we have payroll, so short game is all we can think about. But what's the long game? And that's something that we've got to put things in perspective. And I think you guys said it best, because no other parts of the world is really doing what we're doing in this country. And we have all this knowledge of all the people like yourselves. No one's by themselves. We're not alone here. And I tell you, and I walked around, and Mike and I were not too far from each other. I see the American flags being hung on porches right now, and I see that, and I see that the country is coming in a way that, I don't want to say this is this virus brought us together, but it's a good thing that we brought us together. We need to be unified, and we need to be on the same page. And I think this is where it's a real challenge that we've all been given us. I get the foxhole analogy, but man, this is a time that people are standing up and making a difference. So I know we don't have all the answers, but we'll keep looking for it. And I think the unification of this industry and really of the United States is actually a wonderful thing. So thank you so much for all of you spend time together, and of course try to answer as many questions as possible. But there's a lot more, and I think we have to trust that smart people out there like yourselves got the answers. And I think this is what we know about. So again, thank you so much. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you so much, Tony. I appreciate it. It is uplifting. And I just want to again thank everybody who attended today. And I want to thank our panelists, Kurt, Charlie, and Mike. Thank you, Stephen, also as well, and John. Just want to thank NAPT for partnering with us on this. I think it is a very important initiative. This webinar and the resources that were mentioned here will be on our best practices page. You can find that. It's anchored off of transfinder.com, so it's very easy to find. You also hear more details about our next webinar with NAPT. Just want to thank everybody again and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks, Kurt and Charlie.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate your help.
Thank you, guys. Thank
No,
you.
thanks, guys.
Good day.